People who live or vacation near a body of water know all too well that the possibility of flooding is something that comes with the territory, and those who have grown up in the Sodus Bay area can recall numerous instances of high water. Since official record keeping began in 1860, the water has risen to notably high levels fairly often, but with no predictability, since water levels do not rise and fall in regular cycles. People have coped, or not, as they were able. Having a boat was clearly an advantage. People whose cottages were on the loop of Sand Point were especially vulnerable, recalls Nancy Houston Doubleday. The north and south winds could blow the water back and forth right across the loop. It was an inconvenience and sometimes did damage, but what could you expect? We had built on a sandbar. She further recalls, driving around the loop, you had to guess where the road went, as most of it was under the water, which gave some problems at night on the east end. One evening, in the small hours, my friends were bringing me home and cut the end too close and got stuck. Since I knew all of the elderly neighbors and could imagine them at their windows watching the boys pushing the car and the grinding of the tires, I really expected comments from the grandparents the next day, but I guess no one told on me. The Houston's cottage was built a few feet above ground level, so they at least did not have wet floors and could still spend the summer at the point. Some years they were able to use the septic tank, and Grandfather Houston posted nicely printed signs over the toilets, flush only when necessary. And other years, Nancy remembers a chemical toilet out in the garage, useful but inconvenient. At the Houston's cottage, there were several pairs of boots of different sizes kept on the back porch, which were put on if you went to the car or the mailbox. They also had to be worn if one was walking uptown. As Nancy recalls, if it was nice out, we youngsters went barefoot and carried our shoes until the crown of the road became dry, usually by the Patton or Chittenden cottages. The park was always flooded, and you could spear fish out there. Bud Seymour recalls that as a youngster in 1943, he rowed his dinghy from the South Shore to the Yacht Club and up Irwin Street to Gregg Street, which was about half a curb's height higher than Irwin, where he beached it. He also remembers that people were spearing carp on the baseball field that year. As the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle put it, residents discovered schools of carp and bullheads swimming where once the horsehide rolled. They speared fish over home plate, caught them with bare hands at shortstop, and hooked them on worms out in center field. Our canoe and rowboat were kept tied up to the porch railing. Boating was the best way to get around. When docking at the Yacht Club after a race, we simply pulled up the centerboard and rudder and sailed right up to the porch, tying up to the posts. You often saw a snipe using one of the small trees in the lawn for a mooring. A 1960 article in the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle implied that the high water woes of the past were, thanks to the dam at Messina, virtually a thing of the past. According to the top authorities in the field, in the last 2 years the mighty Great Lakes have been harnessed for all time by the dams and spillways of the St. Lawrence Seaway. The following photos would seem to say otherwise, although certainly flooding has occurred less frequently since the seaway was completed. Crescent Beach, another sandbar, has also suffered at the hands of Mother Nature. The combination of high water and high winds and waves has not only caused damage to cottages, but has actually washed away some of them and the land they sat on. Over time, the breaks have filled in and been built on, only to have the process repeated. For example, part of the bar washed away in 1929, reappeared in the 1940s, was washed away again in 1952, and reappeared later in the 50s. This photo appeared in a newspaper in 1929 under the headline, "Stormy waves cut Crescent Bar Sodus into islets and destroy 4 cottages." Notice where the storm made a peninsula into an island, sweeping away cottages. At the Newton cottage, the water and sandbags in the foreground are where the bar had been. In April of 1973, the Rochester Democrat and Chronicle carried this aerial photo under the headline, "Destruction at Bay." The cut line read, "Cottages crumble into water at Crescent Beach Sandbar at Sodus Bay, foundations eroded by high water." Extremely low water levels apparently occurred much less often than high water levels. These pictures were all taken in November of 1934. In this photo, there are people standing in the channel across from the lighthouse on the inner end of the pier near the Coast Guard station. Where was the photographer standing? Note how far in from the pier this gentleman is standing. On the north side of Sand Point, the alternate pattern of wet and dry ground is the bay bottom. And on the south side of Sand Point, the photographer was standing on dry bay bottom.